Right, let's, for this discussion, we're joined via Zoom by Barry Martin, Nelson Mandela Bay Municipality Senior Director for Water and Sanitation. Mr. Martin, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us here today.
Good afternoon to you, and good afternoon to your listeners and viewers.
All right, Mr. Martin, let's get into it. Nelson Mandela Bay obviously experiencing a drought for quite some time now. I wonder if you could elaborate on the strategies that have been put in place to tackle the drought and water shortages within the metro.
The drought and water shortages are actually tackled on a multi-pronged approach, both short, medium and long-term interventions. Obviously, the short-term interventions that your colleagues has just reported on is fixing the leaks and those obvious stuff are right in front of us. Recently, we've also started our bulk water supply pipelines feeding the different residential areas. We started throttling those valves as well, just to drop the pressure in the areas, just to make people more aware of saving water. In addition to that, the metro has over 70 water pressure management areas, by which we, in large areas, reduce the water pressure to 1 bar at its critical point, meaning that the highest point in that zone will only have 1 bar pressure during those critical areas of usage. And all of this is just stemmed to limit the water use, but also to drop the pressure, because if there's a leak in the system, the pressure would actually just accelerate the leakage. Now, with us reducing the pressure, that actually reduces actually the rate at which the leak do take place. And also your discs that we have installed, we've actually piloted, and it's been piloted at myself and a few colleagues of ours over the last 3 to 5 years already. And we've done this just to check that the flat disc work, and it actually drops the pressure at your house, and you actually save water that way as well. So this is multiple aspects that we've done. We've also know that we get at the moment 65% of water from Nooitgedag, but also the idea is how do we make maximum use of that? The one thing that we've encouraged people to do is actually stick to the water restrictions of an overall water restriction of about 40% for the whole of the metropolitan area as instituted by DWS. And in our plight to do that, we are able to then maximize the usage of the water from Nooitgedag to push it into areas where it wasn't used before. And this is just some of the interventions that we've gone to large lengths to do. In addition to that, as our Executive Mayor has indicated, we have set aside 363 million rand for various projects, of which about 200 million rand was for the equipping of the boreholes and the construction of the new Kwanabushle pump station. In addition to that, we're also building a water treatment facility for the boreholes. Unfortunately, those boreholes were high in iron and manganese, and we had to remove the iron and manganese from that. The project is about 60% complete, and we're going to spend over the next 12 months about 150 million rand finishing off that project as well. So that all adds up to the 363 million rand that is referred to. Some of these projects will actually come on stream by April this year. So our ability to save water now, to stretch it to April when you get that little bit extra water into the system, but also then carry us even further through into the rainy period of our spring and summer rains of next year. So that is our main target in saving water collectively. Ultimately, in the long term, there's a desal plant that we're also planning with ourselves and the Kuga Development Corporation, but that's more in the long term aspect of our planning.
So you've spoken about these strategies and the interventions, both short, medium and long term. I wonder, as we look at the challenges currently faced within the metro, I mean, how much of this can be attributed to poor governance, to infrastructure, and even climate change at large?
We start with the last one, climate change. I normally ask the question, when did climate change start? So that is a very debatable point. But the bottom thing about climate change is if we as a metro sit with a drought every 4 to 5 years, and that has been happening for the last 20 years already. So definitely climate change is starting to affect us. And our ability to develop groundwater, use more groundwater and augment that with desalinated seawater, those are the medium to long-term plans actually to mitigate those effects of climate change. But when it comes to governance and infrastructure, we must realize we come from a past that has not been very good. And we're sitting with aging infrastructure as well, which has got billions of rands of backlog in maintenance, and therefore, and rehabilitation as well. And therefore, we actually need to work very sparingly with the funding that we have applied to the relevant areas and turn around those projects so that we can make the best full use of our infrastructure. Part of that is a loan that the council has taken out to actually refurbish our water pipelines, as well as to refurbish our water meters and those infrastructure. We have, as the Metro has finished two major projects already, was the upgrading of the Luri water treatment facility. It has come at the cost of a few R100 million that we've applied over quite a number of years. We finished Elandschacht water treatment facility as well. So this is the projects that we've been in the pipeline for the long term, rehabilitating the existing infrastructure, modernizing it, and bring it into the first world. We've just finished the booster pump station as well at the cost of R100 million. So these are the projects that are coming on stream gradually but slowly. Obviously, we have to apply it where we'll get the most benefit from it, but also make it strategic so that it can work for the benefit of the Metro in the long term.
So when we look at these interventions and strategies, I mean, also to date, we understand that the DA in the Eastern Cape earlier this month, in fact, wrote to the United Nations asking for aid amid the devastating drought that's gripped the western parts of the province for perhaps the past 6 years. I mean, has there been any developments and updates in this regard? And in the same breath, should Nelson Mandela Bay be declared a disaster area?
We have been classified as a drought disaster area in terms of the national classification, and our colleagues at National Department of COCTA, they're the experts on the legislation, and they advise how that takes place. But in terms of the National Disaster Management Act, we have been classified as a disaster area and for a drought disaster, and we operate within those timeframes and those legislative guidelines. So, and our reporting and our communication in that regard goes via COCTA in terms of the legislation to abide with those aspects. If the time comes, the call is on their side, whether they would then actually physically declare it a disaster area. And obviously the recent areas around COVID and the like has obviously added scrutiny on the legislation, and there are certain aspects that has to one step before the other before a national disaster can be declared. So we leave that in the hands of our national colleagues.
All right, there's obviously so much more to unpack, but as we conclude this conversation, I wonder, what is the impact of COVID-19, been on hospitals, compounded by these water shortages as well? And I wonder, as we head into the festive period, are you concerned about the pressure that the influx of visitors is also going to have on the Metro?
When we started with the drought in our area, we have had one-on-one bilateral meetings with the different sectors, and I presented the detail of the drought and the impact thereof on the health industry, let me put it that way, because we dealt with both the provincial health sector as well as the private health sector. Obviously, the impact on clinics, the impact on hospitals and the like. And they've embraced it. Some of them have gone the ball route to get the balls on stream. And also, in the discussion with them, they switched to sanitization as opposed to washing of hands, which is obviously another way of having your hands clean at all times. But the water demand has definitely gone up. But through the management of the water services and they more embracing best practice at the hospitals and improving the water usage, they've managed to not to have an escalated impact on the water demand of those installations. So that has been the benefit from our consultation with them. Secondly, is in terms of the impact on tourism and the like, we foresee historically in our area there's not been a huge spike over the December-January period because of our industries normally closing down and then the subsequent drop of water usage in that area would be taken up by the tourists when they would come in. So there was never a huge spike. The spike that do take place is normally in the first quarter of the year, where we have excessive hot weathers normally and drier periods, and that would normally, to a greater extent, spike our water consumption. But what I can say over the last 2 years, through our drought communication program and our interaction with both at school and at shop floor level with the communities, door to door in our shopping malls, communicating with the community now these days on social media as well, we managed to get the buy-in of the community, and to a large extent we've not experienced that huge spike in the first quarter of the year, but it remains a reality that is our biggest area of concern from water consumption point of view.
Barry Martin, thank you for your time. Let's leave the conversation there. Barry Martin, Nelson Mandela Bay Municipality Senior Director for Water and Sanitation, again updating on the Metro's water shortages. Again, the drought-stricken area has 7 years of below average rainfall. Again, thank you very much for your time.